It's called The Left-Handed Gun. And incidentally, for a long time, we believed that Billy was left-handed because that's how he appears in the one real picture that we know is correct, has provenance. That's Billy. And he appears to be left-handed, but it was only in like 30 years ago or so that historians realized that the tintypes switched the image. So he actually was right-handed. They were just looking at it backwards. Anyway, there was a movie called The Left-Handed Gun starring Paul Newman.
Paul Newman?
Yeah, Paul Newman in The Left-Handed Gun. And I used to hang out with some lady writers, and I showed them a clip from the movie. And Paul Newman is Billy the Kid, and he has this hot New Mexican babe up against a pole in the barn, and he's trying to kiss her, and she goes, no. And then he tries to kiss her again. She goes, no. He tries to kiss her again. She says, no. Finally, he kisses her, and they fall into the haystack or whatever. And one of my lady writer friends said, I can't believe she said no to Paul Newman 3 times.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 10, America Talk It Up. And I've got a new co-host, Ed Nunez, who I've known personally for the last 5 years, right, Ed?
At least.
And just a little bit background on Ed. He went to Highland High School. He's a former Highland Hornet, and he was a referee for many years, and he played many sports, and now he's probably one of the best play-by-play guys in the state of New Mexico. He's the voice of Western New Mexico University Mustangs, does high school sports. You do it all, Ed.
Well, you know what, Marty, I had to learn a lot along the way, and I learned from guys like Henry T. I grew up in his broadcasting school, and I learned from a lot of people. And I still always say, every broadcast, I'm a real competitor. I try to get better every broadcast. I appreciate you saying we got a lot of great play-by-play guys in the state. You know, Richard Tripp is one of the best. Scott Galetti's very good. Adam Deal, Sebastian Noel. We've got some great guys at ProView. So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, you've been doing the state basketball tournament, state football tournament, and then here's another thing that's amazing about you. For the last, I think, 4 years, you've been doing a weekly TV show called Sports Desk, right?
You know, it's Scott Galetti and I started co-hosting that about 6 years ago, and then Scott moved on, and I got a chance to host by myself. And it's on Tuesdays, 10:30. It's live on Channel 26. So live TV is a little bit different. You know, Jimmy Tran, the producer here, he's doing a great job. But when you're live, you can't. There's a couple times I remember going live without Scott Galetti when I did it myself. And the first time I hosted live, I kind of messed up a little bit, but I got better and better. And again, no, I'm not going to New York. No, I'm not going to ESPN. But I think every broadcast that I have, whether it's on radio or TV, I'm trying to make it the best I can.
And the thing about you is that you can talk about all the major sports. You're well versed on the professional, college, high school, especially high school. But the thing I love about you is you have a rich history of New Mexico history and, history of the United States. And you can talk about a lot of subjects that I like to talk about, history.
Yeah, well, one of the guys you're going to have on now, when he came in, he's going to talk about something that's going to really move the meter. So I love New Mexico history. New Mexico is rich in history, and I think people sometimes forget that. It's got a history of its own, right? And so when I hear that you got guys coming on, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but with the guest you have is like, wait a sec, I've got some questions about that. I've got a deep, I'm reading a book now about the atomic bomb that Chris Wallace wrote.
Yeah.
That's number 2 on the bestseller list, but I'm spacing it out. I don't want to finish it because I'm a guy that could finish a book if I like it in 3 days. So I'm kind of like, okay, let me read about 10 pages here, 10 pages there because I love it and I don't want it to end. So this book that I'm reading about the atomic bomb is just unbelievable.
And we're talking about, in segment 2, we're going to lead in with John Rocky Aragon. He wrote a book on Billy the Kid, and we're going to, and talking about a great storyteller of New Mexico. Wait until you have my next guest. He's quite a storyteller, and it's going to be fun. But with you, talking about the atomic bomb, I remember John Eyrick. Remember John Eyrick Jr.?
The name.
His dad ran for the Senate and got beat by Tony Nye. John played rugby with Rocky and I, but one day they only open up the Trinity site one day of the year. And one day, John Eyrick and I were driving around, and he said, let's drive out to the Trinity site, because you could only get there one time a year. So I went out there and saw the site where the first atomic bomb exploded. And boy, it's an airy feeling when you get there.
I'm at the part now where Truman took over for Roosevelt. He didn't know anything about this special, top secret project. Now he does. He's meeting with Churchill and Stalin at Potsdam, and it's incredible because he's just thrown into this, right? He's different than Roosevelt. He has to deal with Stalin, who wants all this territory and these territories to become communist. He has to deal with Churchill, who goes on these long and rambling speeches. It's fascinating stuff. But like I said, I'm spacing it out because I don't want to read it all in one. I'd read it all in one day.
So my father was the port commander of Manila in 1945. He was the port commander of Liverpool, and when the war ended in Europe, he was in charge of the African American troops, 97,000 of them. They worked the port. So they transport all these guys on Liberty ships to Manila. And my dad worked for General Macarthur. He was the port commander, and they were planning the invasion of Japan. And they were thinking it's going to take 200 to 300,000 men. And of course, we didn't know. I mean, there's going to be if the Americans didn't drop the atomic bomb, I've got to believe there have been a lot of Americans dead. Because the Japanese were going to fight to the last guy.
They were. There's two trains of thought on that. They said that they did that to avoid that loss of American life, but they also wanted to show the Russians that, hey, look, this is what we have. So if you're thinking about anything, we're going to, this is just look what we have. They just to kind of warn them a little bit. So there was two trains of thought of that. Again, the Japanese would have fought. They had the kamikaze pilots, right?
Right.
And they would have fought to the end. They believed that surrender was dishonor. But they had no choice. After Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, there was supposedly another one locked and loaded for Tokyo. They had to give up. They just had no choice.
Yeah, and my father, when he got to Manila, the Japanese butchered like 47,000 Filipinos, and they did a mass grave in the Philippines. And of course, the African Americans did all the work. And this will show you how precious. Army wasn't integrated in 1945. And you've been to Alcatraz there in San Francisco. So visualize island like Alcatraz, and you know how small it was, So,
yes, incredible place.
So can
really
you imagine
incredible.
packing 90,000 black soldiers every night on this little island? And then they got up in the morning and they ferry them over to Manila to do the work, the hard labor. It was so bad. And my father, they had no air conditioning. My dad was in with the troops, hot and humid. They changed clothes 3 times a day, shirts. It was right on the equator. And they came from Liverpool, all these soldiers, because they were used to that cooler weather. And that's when my father, and of course his name was Martin Luther Watts, like Martin Luther King.
Right.
And that's when my dad had a lot of passion for the African-American soldier, because then they got up and then they had to, at the end of their work schedule, they got him on ferries and put him on this little island like Alcatraz. So you can visualize how tough that was. And that's what happened there. And then they were getting the army prepared for the invasion of Japan. And you're right. I mean, I'm even though that was the last time we've ever dropped a bomb, those 2 times, but I hope it never happens. And because now these weapons are 1,000 times more powerful.
Well, there's again, when it happened, President Truman, they're not even sure it's going to work, right? They're not sure.
Yeah, sure.
And then the responsibility, Eisenhower meets with him, and Eisenhower says, don't do it. Eisenhower said it's not worth, but then Truman, I got to say this, he had a lot of advice from a lot of people. He did what he thought was right. In other words, he didn't cave to Ike, right, the commander of all the armies. You might have thought he would have because he's a very young president, right? He's young as far as the position. He was only thought of as the vice president as the last minute. And then Roosevelt never really communicated with him very much at all. And all of a sudden he's thrown into that kind of decision, a weapon that could possibly wreck the world. They had no idea. So that's quite a decision. Again, there's 2 trains of thought. There's some people saying that he should have never done that. And then there's other people saying you saved American lives and you kind of let Russia know that if there's going to be a Cold War, we've got this. What do you got? So, here's our chips. Where's yours?
Well, I probably lean towards Truman doing the right thing at that time.
Right.
But what I know now about the atomic bomb and how devastating it is, maybe I would have had a different thought. But they didn't have a lot of research of how devastating it was going to be. I think if they do today, maybe it would be a different story. But you're right. At that particular moment in August is 1945. And here's the thing: is when Roosevelt died in April, they didn't tell Truman like 3 days after he became president. You know, he didn't even know there was an atomic bomb project.
Right. No, that's exactly what happened. It's funny because they told him to get to the White House right away. He doesn't know what's going on. He gets there, and Mrs. Roosevelt meets him and says, Harry, you know, the president's dead. And he says to her, what can I do for you? And she says, no, Harry, what can we do for you? Because you're the one in trouble now. So I thought that was very telling at that time. And Mrs. Roosevelt's like, look, you've got this World War, and it's near its end, right? The Nazis are about to surrender in Germany, or maybe already did. And then you've got Japan. So, yeah, the world's still in flux, in a state of flux at that time. So Harry Truman came in at a very tough time. He really did. And then having to make that decision to drop that kind of weapon where you don't know what the results are going to be. And we saw it later, right? 10 seconds, they call it, that shook the world.
Right.
You know, I never forgot that going to see it at the museum when I was a kid. I never forgot it.
Yeah, and you think about it. I've been to the Trinity site, and it's an eerie feeling. But, you know, here's another thing that we don't understand. My dad told me that Douglas MacArthur, at a staff meeting just in July of 1945, he was ready. You know, he had that World War I mentality. We got a total victory. You know, there's no substitute for victory. He wanted to invade Japan. He wanted that final battle. And, you know, he had a big ego.
Huge.
And he was thinking about, boy, if we win this battle, I'll be the greatest general of all time. So he was preparing my father, all the logistics. You know, all the in Manila, they were preparing the logistics, the ships to invade Japan. And MacArthur wanted a fight. He wanted a final fight, and he got upset that the bomb came around because it I guess it took away from his final victory that he wanted to do in Japan.
Well, he and George Patton were a lot alike. You know, right? George Patton was the same way. So, yes, I think General MacArthur probably was happy, you know, the war's over, but at the same time, he's prepping, he's mobilizing. That's what generals like MacArthur, U.S. Grant was the same way. Ulysses S. Grant did not quit in the Civil War. He just kept feeding division after division in. So you're right. Those kind of generals like that, Patton was the guy that wanted one last battle, but he knew that even in the movie Patton, he said General MacArthur doesn't want me at the Pacific. He doesn't want me over there. And they had two big egos like that. Forget it. They'd have never worked out.
And, of course, you know, Patton slapped that soldier there in Sicily, and they put him on probation because they couldn't stand a guy slapping a soldier, you know.
Well, think about that during that time then. I mean, that's kind of minor right then. I mean, he shouldn't have done it, and he got in trouble for it. But George Patton didn't care. George Patton, he was a soldier. You saw the scenes in the movie when he's there at the Roman ruins. He's thinking he's reincarnated. I've been here before. He's a soldier throughout his whole life, and even if it's not true. Some people don't believe in reincarnation. He did. He had believed he had been a soldier during you know, he's a Roman soldier. So that guy was born to be a general, born to be what he was.
You know what's fascinating about Douglas MacArthur? He grew up at Fort Wingate here in New Mexico. His dad was the general of the Fort Wingate outpost here in New Mexico. So when he was a little boy, he lived here in New Mexico. Douglas MacArthur. Of course, his dad was Arthur MacArthur. He became a general of the Army. He became a 4-star, 3-star general before he died, after the Philippines, during the Spanish-American War, they took over the Philippines and, of course, Cuba and whatever. That was when America started its imperialism period of our country, you know, taking over countries that, you know.
Well, you could argue that they probably started with their manifest destiny with the taking, the selling of Mexico, selling all that territory for 20, President Polk. Now, again, look, this is a history and it's already done history.
Right.
But President Polk, I'm surprised he's not on Mount Rushmore getting the territory that he did for $20 million. I'm always surprised he's not on Mount Rushmore because you talk about manifest destiny. And again, it's history. I'm not going back and saying it's already happened. But they got Nevada, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California for $20 million. Wow, what a deal. And then like you said, the imperialism kept going.
I guess you could say when Stephen Watts Kearny came down from Colorado Springs and took over Santa Fe without a fire shot. You know the story.
That's right.
But here's the thing: is you could say that was the start of American imperialism when we took on the Mexico in 1845, because at that time it was a land grab. The
of course
Texas
it
was a land grab, and the victors tell the history of the story. Usually the victors write the history, right, Ed?
No, that's true.
Most cases, but there's another side of the Mexican battle. They were ill prepared to go up against America. We took advantage of it.
No, you know what? And it was a 2-year war, 1846 to 1848. And you're right. That it was probably a time that President Polk knew that the New Mexico's army, and again, they were led by General Santa Anna, who wasn't exactly the best, leader for Mexico. He wasn't.
And he had some good traits, but he wasn't, totally into it. I mean, the fact is, the Americans had Zachary Taylor, Winfield Scott, Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Longstreet, all those great generals.
George Meade, bunch of
They
war
all fought
generals.
in that war.
Yes.
And that was the feuds of the academy. That's when they started the Army Academy in 1801. All those guys were in that officer. We had all these trained officers in that battle.
Yeah, think about it. Colonel Robert E. Lee, as a soldier in the Mexican War, was trapped in a river. He almost got captured and killed. He barely got out. So yeah, there were some stories about the Civil War that again, generals that would fight as generals later. So yeah, they had a great staff on the American Army during that time for sure.
So Ed, we're going to wrap this up, and Ed's going to be our regular host for the next multiple episodes. And we'll be talking about what's going on in the national sports. But this is what I love about Ed Nunez. He can talk history that nobody I know of. You and I could go into a lot of subjects.
Oh, I love history.
And we need to do a segment on the Mexican-American War, what happened, the positives, the pros and cons. A lot of things happened. It really changed the scope of the state of New Mexico, that one war did.
No question.
And the way we are today. But anyway, and then the other thing we need to talk about, Ed, is the Santa Fe Ring. They call it the Santa Fe Ring, where these judges took the land grants and carved it out for their own use, and Harding County and Curry County, that was all, they were all Hispanic land grants that was taken away. And so those are stories that you and I can talk about, the injustice, and of course, I met Tia Arena back when I was at New Mexico Highlands. He was a character, the rate of the...
Right.
So we have a lot to talk about. So we're going to wrap this up. And my next segment, I'm bringing in John Rocky Aragon, one of the greatest storytellers. We're going to be talking about Billy the Kid.
I'm going to sit in and listen to that one for sure.
Welcome back to segment 2, episode 10. And I probably have my co-host on this segment is John Rocky Aragon. Now, I go back to 1974 when I met Rocky. He was playing rugby at the time. He played with the Aardvarks. We were teammates for a while. We actually played against each other when he played for Santa Fe. And Rocky is probably, in my opinion, and this is going to be a wonderful next 2 segments, is he's one of the greatest storytellers of all time, especially Spanish history about the people in New Mexico. And you're going to love Rocky's story. But the thing about you, Rock, is that you could tell some great rugby stories. I did a segment. I did an episode. Our last episode was the greatest block party for the Aardvarks. But I think you were there that day. But I would love to hear your version of that story. But
I'm not guilty, Marty.
But we're going to talk about, Rocky wrote a book called Billy the Kid, Last Ride, right? And it came out, how many years ago did it come out?
That was published in 2011, Marty. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about this book you wrote. And tell me, why did you write a book called Billy the Kid? What was your interest to do Billy the Kid?
Well, Marty, what happened was that there came a time when I finally realized that we can't drink and drive anymore. And I don't like to watch TV. So I was in my house, and I'm always looking for a good novel to read, especially Westerns. I love Westerns. But there are very few great American Westerns. We've got Lonesome Dove, we've got True Grit, we've got Little Big Man, And but there are only a handful of really great westerns. And I finally thought, well, I think I'll write the western that I would like to read. I'm going to write a western the way I think it should be. And I chose Billy the Kid because everybody loves Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid is the most famous New Mexican. There are over 60 movies about Billy the Kid and countless histories and essays and television shows, novels. And so there's something about Billy the Kid that he keeps coming. In fact, there are often still news stories about some aspect or another of Billy the Kid. Let me read you something before we go into it a little further. University of New Mexico historian Dr. Paul Hutton wrote this. He said, Billy the Kid just keeps riding across the dreamscape of our minds, silhouetted against a starlit western sky. Handsome, laughing, deadly. Shrewd as the coyote, free as the hawk. The outlaw of our dreams. Forever free, forever young, forever riding. And that's the thing about Billy the Kid. He never goes away. And what I thought I'd talk about today, Marty, in the short time we have, is a few of the movies about Billy the Kid, because there are actually two Billy the Kids. We've got the actual guy who lived and died. Incidentally, today's the 16th. He was killed on July 14, 1881. So 2 days ago was the 139th anniversary of his death. But he was born in New York. His mother was an Irish immigrant. They moved west. His mother had tuberculosis. They came to Santa Fe, where she married her companion, a man named Antrim. And they went to Silver City. He grew up. She died. He became an outlaw. Rustling cattle, though, he wasn't a killer or a stagecoach robber or anything like that. And when he got a chance to go straight, he was in Lincoln County, New Mexico, and he worked for an Englishman who was murdered by the competition, the House. And he became a member of a deputized band of regulators, they called themselves. And many of us are familiar with the many episodes and the battles that took place in the Lincoln County War. At the end, Billy's faction was wiped out, and he was tried in Mesilla and sentenced to death. And when the judge asked him if he had anything to say, he said, at least 300 men have been killed in Lincoln County in the past 3 years, but I did not kill all of them. But he was sentenced to hang, and then he made his famous escape from the Lincoln County jail. He was on the loose for a few months, and then Pat Garrett killed him at Fort Sumner. That's the historic Billy the Kid. Now, since Billy lived, his story never goes away. It keeps growing and growing. I'd like to talk to you about a few of the movies.
One thing I want to add to this story, my connection to Billy the Kid was Jane Garrett. She went to junior high with me at Monroe Junior High School, and her dad was the son of Pat Garrett.
Yeah.
And I remember going over, and she used to date Don Junick, and we used to hang out at her house. Remember those guys?
The Garretts lived right around the corner from me, Jane and Susan.
Right.
And boy, those were beautiful girls.
So I remember going over, and I met Mr. Garrett, and he showed me the gun, supposedly, that killed Billy the Kid, and the revolver, and I saw some letters that he had. And when he passed away, I think he passed away in 2001, or her dad did, and he gave all that to the museum in Santa Fe, the Billy the Kid Museum, or the Pat Garrett story of it. But yeah, that was my connection, and it was a real life connection with the family of Pat Garrett. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and you knew him too.
I had a terrible crush on Jane, but I never had a chance.
But she lives in Taos, New Mexico now, and right behind the Kit Carson Park. But go ahead, let's talk about these movies.
Let me tell you some amusing things. One of the they've been making movies since like 1930 about Billy the Kid. One of the early ones was in 1938. It was called The Return of Billy the Kid, and the star was Roy Rogers. And the way the movie starts out, Roy Rogers is Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett shoots him, and but Pat Garrett hasn't told anyone that he killed Billy yet. And then a stranger comes to town, and it's Roy Rogers, and he's riding his horse and
Singing a
playing his
song.
guitar and singing. And so he's just a guy who looks exactly like the dead Billy the Kid. So Garrett enlists him as sort of a secret agent to find out who are the bad ranchers that are trying to wipe out the homesteader. So that's the return of Billy the Kid. Another movie about Billy that's well known is it's called The Left-Handed Gun. And incidentally, for a long time, we believed that Billy was left-handed because that's how he appears in the one real picture that we know is correct, has provenance. That's Billy, and he appears to be left-handed. But it was only in like 30 years ago or so that historians realized that the tintypes switched the image. So he actually was right-handed. They were just looking at it backwards. Anyway, there was a movie called The Left-Handed Gun starring Paul Newman.
Paul Newman.
Yeah, Paul Newman in The Left-Handed Gun. And I used to hang out with some lady writers, and I showed them a clip from the movie. And Paul Newman is Billy the Kid, and he has this hot New Mexican babe up against a pole in the barn, and he's trying to kiss her, and she goes, no. And then he tries to kiss her again. She goes, no. He tries to kiss her again. She says, no. Finally, he kisses her, and they fall into the haystack or whatever. And one of my lady writer friends said, I can't believe she said no to Paul Newman 3 times. So, another interesting movie. Do we have the Jane Russell? So, I won't try to show up, but Howard Hughes had a girlfriend named Jane Russell, and he wanted to make her a star. So, what he did was he made a Billy the Kid movie. It was called The Outlaw, and it starred Jane Russell. And when you see the poster for the movie, it has a picture of Jane Russell, and she was she had quite a bust line.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, and in the picture, it's toward the end there. And in the picture of Jane Russell, we're going to see if we can find the picture
Yeah,
here.
we're looking for the picture right now.
I can find it, maybe. Yeah, there you go.
Why don't you put it up to the camera here?
So here was the poster for The Outlaw. Is that a good view?
Is that good? Yeah.
Okay, we got it. So what you see in the picture, in the poster, is that the outlaw is a little guy in the lower corner, and it's a picture of Jane Russell
Showing her.
and her bust line.
Yeah, showing her bust.
And Bob Bosbell of True West Magazine said, it was a double feature. Let's talk another movie about the Kid. Billy the Kid seems to change with the times, and people use him for what they're trying to do at the time that they make the movie. So in 1973, Sam Peckinpah, I think he'd already done The Wild Bunch, and he decided to do a Billy the Kid movie, and it was entitled Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
Is that what Bob Dylan was in the movie?
Bob Dylan, what he did was he got a bunch of he was a celebrity. He got a bunch of hip celebrities: Bob Dylan, Sam Pickens, who's
Chris
the
Christopherson.
yeah, and there's a singer, Rita Coolidge, and they all went down to Mexico to make this Billy the Kid movie.
So the movie was made in Mexico, not in New Mexico.
Yeah, it was made in Mexico, and so in this, Billy the Kid is it's 1973, and it has a Vietnam era feel. So in this film, Billy the Kid is like a cool hippie dude, right?
So it's a hippie version of Billy the Kid.
It's sort of a 1973 version of Billy the Kid, and Pat Garrett is the establishment, and incidentally, among Billy the Kid fans, that is it's a favorite of many.
I like that movie. That was one of my favorite Billy the Kid's movie. Yeah, one of them. Yeah.
Well, it has Peckinpah, so you got lots of blood shooting out everywhere and stuff.
The story I heard that they went over budget. I read some story about it. They spent so much money on drugs and beer and partying. The place just went crazy for days and days. But they said it was one of the greatest party sets of all time for a movie.
They said Peckinpah couldn't begin shooting until he had a half a tumbler of whiskey every morning.
So I heard that story.
But Bob, in that movie, Bob Dylan plays a very interesting character. He's just some stranger hanging around, and he helps Billy the Kid out in one of the first shootouts. And he throws knives. And when they ask him who he is, they say, "What's your name?" He says, "Alias." And then they say, "Alias what?" He says, "Alias, alias." And then Christopherson or somebody says, "I think we ought to call him Alias."
So then there's another version. There's a version called The Young Riders. Was that one of the better ones?
I think you're talking about Young Guns.
Young Guns, okay.
So this is the story. According to some people, Billy the Kid saved the Western. Billy the Kid never goes away. So when we grew up, Marty, you and I, we grew up on Westerns. Everything on TV was a Western. We always felt bad. We couldn't do our homework on Sunday night because we were watching Bonanza and so on, 60s Westerns. But in the 70s, Westerns kind of died out. People lost their interest. There were some revisionist ones. Doc Holliday's a junkie. And, there was a movie called Dirty Little Billy and stuff. But there were no great Westerns in the 70s. Then, in 1982, I think it was, they made a Billy the Kid movie called Young Guns, and it was a bunch of slick, cool cats, and they saved the Western. After that, Western, there was a big revival. Since then we have great Westerns, but Billy the Kid saved the Western.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. You're saying that Billy the Kid, the story never ends with Billy the Kid. There's going to be another movie made, probably another little different version of it, but people just can't get enough of Billy the Kid.
That is correct.
Is that what it is?
Billy the Kid keeps riding across the dreamscape of our minds.
So we're going to wrap this segment up, and we're going to go to the next segment. We'll continue a little bit on Billy the Kid, but we're going to talk about this character of Hispanic history, Oñate. And I think you have a great story about him, the real story about Oñate.
Well, I have an opinion about the issue of taking down statues and things like that.
Yeah, so we're going to come back to segment 3. I still want to finish up a little bit on Billy the Kid because it's a fascinating subject, and you wrote one of the great books of all time.
Well, thanks, Marty.
So let's get back. We'll be back. We got a break for commercials here. We'll be back for segment 3. Well, welcome back to segment 3. I've got John Rocky Aragon. I used to call him Loose Rocks. I used to say, you never knock the rock. If you do, you're in trouble in a rugby game. And I never did, Rocky. I never challenged you. But boy, we had some great times as ruggers. But hey, we've got this book. Rocky wrote this book, Billy the Kid's Last Ride. You can go up to Amazon.com. You can Google the book, and let me tell you, it's a great perspective of Billy Kid, and some of it's fictional. You put some stories in there to make it juice it up a little bit, right?
Well, the first half is. The second half is a fictional account of the last 3 months of Billy the Kid's life.
Right.
He escaped from the Lincoln County Jail, killed his guards right before they were going to hang him, got away. And he was killed 3 months later at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Pat Garrett gave Billy 3 months to get away. Some people say Pat was afraid to catch him. But Billy was only 100 miles away at Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And he could have been in San Francisco. He could have been in New York City. He could have been in Mexico in one hard day's ride, Right. He could have been in Ireland, but he was only 100 miles away at Fort Sumner. The consensus among the best modern Billy historians is that he was there because he was in love with a woman, Paulina Maxwell, who was the princess of the Maxwell land grant and of the Fort Sumner. So anyway, he died. He was on the loose for 3 months. And people who are Billy freaks, they argue, why didn't he run away? Why didn't he go to Mexico? Why didn't he do this? So what I did in my novel is I told a story that he did go to Mexico, but things didn't work out there. And so he was blocked in by fate and had to come back. So that's the second half of Billy the Kid's last ride.
What was Billy the Kid's real name? He came from New York, right?
Yeah. His name was Henry McCarty.
McCarty, okay. And so that's interesting about him. So, yeah, like you said, the Billy the Kid, we could do another segment. We're going to have Rocky come back on and talk more about Billy the Kid. But, hey, I want to finish this segment out on talking about Oñate, the famous Spanish explorer. And you have some thoughts on that. Tell me what you think right now with this people trying to tear down a statue. Is the real story getting out? It's a mixed story, isn't it, Rocky?
Well, I've been reading about the news, and I see Confederate statues being torn down, and now it's come to New Mexico, and people are tearing down statues of conquistadores, and I feel that people should not. I think it's a big mistake to conflate Spanish settlers and conquistadores with Confederate generals in the Civil War.
And they rebelled against the United States.
Yeah, they were traitors.
Yeah.
And they were fighting for a terrible cause. They were fighting for slavery. They try to pretend that wasn't what it was about, but that was what it was about.
Yes.
And by that time, most of the world, by the time of the Civil War, England, France, Spain, the South Latin American countries or Mexico, civilization had come to a point where everybody said, slavery is no good. All right.
We were the last.
But not us, because it was too profitable.
Right.
And there had been people, abolitionists, since the time of the writing of the Constitution. And the Constitution, that's why they put in the Electoral College, because the states in the South were afraid that slavery would be voted out if they didn't have some guarantees. Anyway, so what's happening here is that a couple of Oñate statues have been removed, and
so before you go there, tell people who Oñate really who was he?
Okay.
Officially.
Yeah, Oñate. So what happened was that as the Spanish were pushing north out of Mexico, several explorers came through and circled around and explored. Coronado was most notable, and The King of Spain finally decided to allow New Mexico to be settled by Spaniards. And Oñate, he won the contract, right, to put together an expedition and come to New Mexico. So he brought the first caravan of settlers to New Mexico.
And was it about 600?
Yeah, about 500 or 600 people, about 150 fighting men and women and children. And they brought lots of things that were good for the Indians, different types of seeds and crops and techniques, but one of the driving forces was that the priesthood had convinced the King of Spain that they needed to save the souls of the poor pagan Indians. So Oñate brings people here. They came up the Rio Grande Valley. He settled at San Juan. Basically, he took it's a pueblo where San Juan, right in that area where San Juan was. He kicked them out of the pueblo and took over. So the big controversy comes out of his contacts with the Pueblo of Acoma. Oñate and his men had gone around and to all the pueblos and said, look, God gave the authority to the Pope gave it to the King of Spain, the King of Spain sent us, our authority, our right to sovereignty comes from God, now you're going to be under the Pope and the King of Spain. And they all said, okay, so for what it's worth. So not long after that, Oñate's nephew and about 30 guys were out exploring, and they came to Acoma, which had already been, had already agreed to fealty to the King of Spain. And they said, we need some flour for our horse, some flour for us and some corn for our horses. The Acoma said, wait 3 days. They waited for 3 days. The Acoma said, come on up, it's ready, come get your flour. So, and I assume everybody that's listening knows about Acoma. It's called the Sky City. It's a pueblo on top of an unassailable mesa. Okay, so they climbed up, and the Acomas got them to break. About 20 of them went up, and the Acomas got them to break into little groups and then attacked them. And everybody in the pueblo attacked them. The women were on the top of the roofs throwing things down on them, and the warriors assaulted them from all sides. And Oñate's nephew, Juan de Oñate, was killed by the leader of the Acomas. And about 10 Spaniards were killed, and several managed to escape. Two of them jumped off the side of the mesa because they had nowhere else to go. One was killed, but the other one landed in deep sand dunes and sort of rolled down. So the Spaniards went back to San Juan and reported to Oñate. And what people don't understand is that in order to make war against the Acamas, the Spanish had a very complex legal system. He had to have hearings and affidavits, and he had to get the opinion of the priest as to what was a just war, and everything had to be documented. He did all that. He sent Juan de Zaldivar's brother, Vicente de Zaldivar, back to Acoma to punish the Acamas. And Vicente went back. He had about 80 guys. There were about 1,000 Acamas. And he attacked Acoma, and he was able to prevail. And a lot of people don't know about the battle, but he had his men attacking one side while some others climbed up the backside of the mesa and pulled up 2 culverins, these small cannons. And then they established a beachhead, finally expanded it. Many Acamas escaped, but there were about 500 survivors. And among them were 19 men who were of the age of warriors. And Oñate sentenced all the non-combatants to be 20 years slavery in the households of the Spanish, and each of the warriors had to have 1 foot cut off. And some of these, they took some of them to Santo Domingo. And the position that the Spaniards were in order to understand what was going on here, is there were 500 Spaniards and 60,000 Pueblo Indians in New Mexico. So Oñate and his guys were kind of scared. They figured they were worried about their families. They knew they had to do something to show the Pueblos that they can't start murdering Spaniards. And that's the background that most people know about. But we hear a lot about the feat. In the summer of 1998, it was the 400-year anniversary of Oñate, and all the Spanish people in New Mexico were celebrating. Oh, we're cool. We were conquistadores and all that. But one night, and there was a statue of Oñate up at Alcalde across from San Juan, and one night somebody snuck in there and cut off the foot of the statue.
Wow.
And which was a clear reference to Oñate cutting off the feet of the Acamas. And so, and I thought it was hilarious. All that summer, it started a dialogue and people writing letters to the New Mexican all summer long. Oñate, he shouldn't have cut off the feet. Oh, then another letter. Oh, he had to cut off the feet. And it went on and on. And I thought it was wonderful. You know, it was 400 years ago, but we're still talking about these things that happened. And in the case of Spaniards and Indians, it was a different time.
Well, you know, Ronky, you talk about Wounded Knee in the Dakotas. The Americans massacre a whole tribe of Dakota Indians.
Yeah.
And nobody, and that was a pure power play by the American Army. They just didn't, and look at all the atrocities that the Americans did to the Native Americans. But the thing about it is, he was trying to control New Mexico. Like you say, he only had 500 guys. And one of the reasons why Aramijo left in 1845 without defending Santa Fe, he was afraid that the Indian tribes are going to join John Watts Kearny in the army, and he only had about 500 American army. But anyway, that story goes, it builds up, and so I guess a lot of the Native Americans still they still think of that story. They bring it up all the time, but he had to do what he had to do to protect the people of his group.
Yeah, and you bring up Wounded Knee in the American Army, and I'd like to make one point if I have a couple of minutes.
Sure.
I would argue that in general, the Spanish law was much fairer to the American Indians than the Northern Europeans who were pushing west from the East Coast.
Exactly.
The Northern Europeans pushed the Indians out, and there are hardly any remnants. Some of the tribes survived. The Iroquois had a 5-nation alliance, and they were able to survive, But all in all, they removed the Indians. They didn't want to live with Indians. They didn't want to be part of the Indians. They just wanted their land. The Spanish policy, the official policy was that we're going to join with the Indians. They're going to be part of our civilization. And there were very strict laws against mistreating Indians. I'm not saying they weren't abused,
but you think about it. If you did a DNA check, if you went back and got your DNA, you would find out that most people that lived in this state, a Hispanic population, 300 to 400 years, they have a percentage of Native American blood in them because of the migration, the Native Americans and the Spanish coming together. Am I right? In most cases.
Yeah, Marty. As I say, the Spanish philosophy was to live with the Indians.
Yes.
And to incorporate them into their organization. And yes, the Mexican race is by definition half Indian and half Spanish.
And the funny thing is, I grew up with a guy named Carl Miranda. His father was Gilbert Miranda. He became head of the APS Sports. I think Ed Nunez would know who he was, Gilbert Miranda. But I remember Carl would tell everybody when we were little kids at Inez Elementary, he was 100% pure Spanish.
Yeah.
And I believe
Puro español.
But
right.
And you know what? I believed him. And then about 15 years ago, I saw him at Walmart, and we were talking about it. And I said, you know what, Carl, I bet you've got Native American blood. No way. And he grew up in Chimayón, his family. So anyway, he goes and gets one of those DNA tests, and it comes back, he's 35% Santa Clara Indian. Pueblo.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. He's in Chimayón. So here's the funny thing. I saw him about a month ago. He's now on the Santa Clara Indian Committee. So that proves your point. The Spanish,
you might get some benefits.
right? But it proves your point. The Spanish mingle with the Native Americans.
That was what they were trying to do.
Exactly.
Right? So I really want to thank you, Marty. It's been great.
So Rocky, we're going to have you come back for more stories. Folks, if you like what we're doing here, go up to Facebook and hit like and follow, and go up our YouTube channel and hit the subscriber button. And then some of these segments in August, we'll be putting them on Channel 23, Comcast 23 here in Albuquerque. So, hey, Rocky, thanks for coming on America Talking. What a great segment.
Thank you, Marty. Adios.